I'm Dennis Rodoni. I'm District 4 Supervisor here in Marin County, representing beautiful Stinson Beach and all of West Marin. I want to welcome you here tonight to have this very interesting conversation. You know, probably 2 years ago, we wouldn't have even thought about what microgrids were or what having a conversation like this. And to see the great turnout like we have tonight is really amazing, the interest in this. You know, as our world has changed, even though federal government doesn't want to recognize that climate change is a reality, we all do, and we see it every day here in Stinson in particular, and in the county, and throughout California, with the fires, reading about and seeing on the news channels, the hurricanes. We know that climate is changing, and then just last weekend with PG&E shutting off the power to 50, 60,000 people in the North Bay and Lake County, we recognize that times have changed and what we do has to change and the methods that we use have to change. So I want to thank Peter for starting this discussion and continuing this discussion. Microgrids can play an important role in our communities, in our daily life, and also in the case of emergencies. So I'm interested in hearing the conversation tonight. Thank you all for being here. And I'll turn this over to Peter.
Welcome, everybody. I'm glad so many of you could make it out here. Before I get into the slide presentation, just wanted to give you a little bit of context, a short little history lesson. Over 10 years ago, we did an event here at the same community center called Stinson Solar Sunday. We got a lot of folks out here, and it was so inspirational that it ended up convincing the local community center here to install a solar system, as well as the Bolinas Community Center and the Point Reyes Community Center. The Point Reyes Community Center was the only one to install a battery at that time, so they in essence created a small microgrid, which has been operating fine for over 10 years. So part of the purpose of today's event is to sort of educate you about microgrids, batteries, and maybe why we should now try to create a microgrid here in Stinson Beach as well. But first of all, what exactly is a microgrid? There is an official government definition. It's a mouthful, but let me read it and then try to decipher what it means. An integrated energy system consisting of distributed energy resources and multiple energy loads operating as a single controllable entity in parallel to or islanded from the existing power grid. Now the key phrase there is islanded. It's called islanding. So right now this solar system here, if the grid goes down, it goes down too. We do have a propane generator which can fire up. But if there was a long-term emergency, we might run out of fuel. And so the idea of the microgrid is you can be connected to the grid, but if there's an emergency, we island from the grid and we can have power. And if you have a battery, solar, and a generator, you can in essence have indefinite power. So microgrids, they're not that simple. There's this slide here, over here shows that there's a lot of stakeholders involved. There's the community. There's the macro grid, the PG&E grid, if you will. There's the companies that supply the components. And then there's the government officials, the constraint makers, the incentive makers. And then there's the user, which would be this community center itself. There's a more complicated version of this slide that shows 100 different arrows showing all different kinds of relationships. But I think you get the idea. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. So we're going to look now at some data about microgrids. And this is basically looking at the world market. And notice that North America and Asia Pacific are the two largest markets. In Asia Pacific, that's much more remote power systems. Places like India where there isn't a grid, so you need power from microgrids. In North America, most of the microgrids are actually connected to the grid, with the exception of places like Alaska. But for the most part, they're things like military bases. Some of them are actually deployed by utilities themselves. On this next slide here, you're going to see that the remote microgrids, if you look at the global market, are still the largest market with about 39%. And then after that, we have commercial and industrial that are going to be businesses, things like data centers that need to have power all the time. And then the community segment is basically 8%. That's where this microgrid, if we build one here, would fall under. This would be a community microgrid. And you can see the other categories there: institutional campus like hospitals, military, and then actually microgrids deployed by utilities. We call them utility distribution microgrids. So what kind of resources go into microgrids? Here's a chart showing from last year. This is a snapshot in time. The number one resource is called combined heat and power. So that's the idea that even if you burn fossil fuels, you not only get electricity, you get thermal energy. And so that's important for hospitals and college campuses, stuff like that. But coming in number two is solar PV, which just basically beats out diesel generators. And then you can see other technologies: wind power, for example, biomass, hydroelectricity, and then energy storage. But if you jump ahead out to 2027, you'll see now that the mix has changed. And in fact, solar PV is by far the largest contributor with 29%, and then energy storage is 25%. And that's really the trend, that it's solar and batteries that are sort of taking over not only microgrids, but that's sort of the preferred way to generate on-site power. And so that's kind of what the future lies, and we here could become part of that trend by installing a battery, so we'd have a solar battery and then a propane generator backup for our microgrid. And here's why people are turning to solar. Notice how the costs of solar have declined dramatically. It's going down. What's interesting is that every forecast of solar energy has been wrong. They've all underestimated how fast the power cost is going to decline. And if you see here on the next slide, the same thing is now happening with batteries. Here are three kinds of batteries. The one in the middle, advanced lead acid, that's the most common one we're familiar with. We have lead acid batteries in our cars. That's sort of been the traditional battery technology. But the one that's really getting the most attention today is lithium-ion batteries. And that's because they're in electric vehicles, they're in our cell phones, they're in our laptops, but now they're going into microgrids. And the other reason why they're popular, so they're lower in cost because there's been so much investment in them, but they can kind of do the most amount of things you want a battery to do. They're sort of in the middle. They can do what's called power, when you need little short bursts of energy, and they can also store energy over a longer term. The other type of battery we have here is called a flow battery, which can really store power over really long periods of time, 4 to 6 hours. And those will probably become more important, especially here in California when we move to 100% clean energy, because we have that new law that Governor Brown just signed. So here's a map looking at the US, and I was really surprised to find this out, but that California has had the most power outages of any state, and it's been that way for 9 years in a row. Last year we had over 200 power outages. Now on the East Coast they've had longer duration power outages because of the hurricanes, but we have a lot of power outages, and that's one reason why microgrids are becoming they're becoming more pervasive here in California, especially in the Bay Area with Silicon Valley companies. And you can look at the other states. Notice a lot of the states on the East Coast also have a lot of power outages. We have New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. Texas also has a lot of power outages. And for some reason here, actually Alaska and Hawaii don't have a lot of power outages, but they are major microgrid markets just because there's not a lot of ways to share electricity. Those are more remote microgrids where they're basically operating in island mode all of the time. So why build a microgrid? Here's a chart looking at sort of summing up a project that we at Navigant did with the California Energy Commission. We did 26 case studies, and we asked people, why did they build a microgrid? Was it reliability? Was it saving money? What was it? Reducing carbon footprint. And here on the next slide, you'll see that in California, the number one reason people build a microgrid is to integrate renewable energy. That's primarily solar energy, although it can be wind power as well. And then after that comes resiliency, and then after that, tied with resiliency, are bill savings. So microgrids, they might cost something to build, but they can also save you money because you can store your energy in a battery. Let's say on a hot, sunny afternoon when the power on the grid is expensive, you can generate your own energy stored in a battery and actually not take power from the grid. So there's other reasons you might want to have a microgrid. You might also want to reduce your carbon footprint, or you might actually want to sell extra energy to the larger grid. So these are the key questions now. Why are we here? So what are the challenges facing community microgrids? Number one, how's the best way to streamline the design and implementation? Then can we reduce the engineering costs? There's this new concept, microgrid in a box. Can you put them together like Lego blocks? We're not quite there yet, but there's a lot of companies moving in that direction. What kind of battery makes the most economic sense for a place like this community center? Is it lithium ion? Are there different kinds of lithium ion batteries? Then how best to help communities create microgrids? How can we find the funding for them? And then how can communities and local public agencies like water districts, fire departments, how can they best collaborate? And then can microgrids really stimulate a broader approach to community resiliency? Another concept that came up over 10 years ago, and Ty Cashman is here in the room, he came up with this phrase of a solar safety net. The idea that what if you had batteries scattered throughout the community at key locations at sort of neighborhood level, where if there was a grid outage, you'd have the centralized microgrid here at the community center, but you might also have some scattered out, and maybe that would even be an informal arrangement with your neighbors. You know there's someone who has a serious health issue. If there's a power outage, you might check on them. You might just say, you know, come to my house if the grid goes down. So that's something that could be investigated over the longer term, but it could also just be an informal network. And then what about Stinson Beach? So we have here some photographs that Maury Nelson took. Richard Reisner also developed some maps. How much solar is in Stinson Beach? We did a survey back in 2008 that showed there were 21 solar systems at that point in time. Now, we're not sure if this data is completely accurate. It's really hard to tell. Maury actually got in his airplane and took photographs. You can take a look at them over there on the table, and he identifies where they are. And so he shows about 51 solar systems currently operating in Stinson Beach. Most of them are in Seadrift, which is a gated community. But interestingly enough, they are in a private subdivision, and you might even be able to create a microgrid there because you're not having to deal with some regulatory issues that impact public roads. And then also, a lot of the key communities here already have solar systems. This community center, the water district has installed solar, and the fire building right next door also has solar. So if we assume that there's 300 watts per solar panel, the total amount of clean solar energy in Stinson Beach is about 1/3 of a megawatt. Now that might not mean a lot to a lot of you, but that's essentially enough power for 300 homes in California, average-sized homes, which is actually greater than the population here in Stinson Beach. So theoretically, we could power up everyone in Stinson Beach with solar energy if we are only allowed to do that. And so where should a new battery be installed here in Stinson Beach to integrate with the solar and the battery? Should it be here at the community center? I'm sort of arguing that maybe that should be the case. And with that, that's the end of our PowerPoint. Let's bring up the panelists and let's continue the discussion and talk about microgrids.
Yeah. My name is John Sarter, and my company is called Off the Grid Design and also Sarter Construction and Design. I've been in the design build industry for 32 years and always been a sustainable builder, but in the last several years I've begun integrating not only renewable energy but electric vehicles into my structures and systems. So they're sort of a cohesive system of living and transportation energy that is all carbon neutral by virtue of the solar on the roof.
Well, tell us, let's go with Vipul Gore.
Vipul Gore from Gridscape Solutions. We are a startup in Fremont, down south from here. We have actually deployed microgrids at the fire stations, and now we are deploying them at few city halls and police headquarters departments. All of these are considered to be critical facilities, and so in our microgrid system we have a solar system, a carport system with a battery system. We'll also integrate the diesel generator that is on site with our system, and now we also include electric vehicle charging systems in it, and specifically vehicle to grid, so you can actually connect your car, and it will normally get power from the sun when your grid connected is operating normally. But let's say you really are in a microgrid mode, you are completely out of the grid, and your solar is down, maybe it's night time, and the battery is depleted. Then you can also use the car to power the fire station or that building. So we are working on those kind of technologies, and we have deployed few sites in Fremont, and now we are doing 5 fire stations in Stockton, a few of them in Fontana in Southern California, and city of Richmond, and a few other cities in the whole peninsula. So
we started off really focusing a lot on off-grid energy storage, because off-grid is a very mature market. These type of technologies we're going to talk about tonight, even though you may not have seen them or actually known that you're experiencing them, they're not a new technology. They've been around for a long time, and so I think that's hopefully something that we can do tonight is get you more familiar and comfortable with them, so that you can really understand the benefits they can provide to you as a community. So we've been doing a lot of work in Puerto Rico on the rebuild there since the grid was destroyed after Hurricane Maria. Thank you. There's a lot of folks down there, and they're all needed and all hands on deck. So we've been doing projects including water pumping, because if your water pumps run on electricity and you lose power, you have no water. We've also been doing some community centers, some community evacuation centers. There's all these schools which were designated for evacuation areas, and they have no backup power. So after the hurricane, there was really no reason to go to the evacuation center. So we're doing solar plus storage resiliency on those schools. That's a lot of projects there. And then also seeing businesses that want to have their own energy independence or resilience. So sometimes it's batteries only. You don't have to have all this other stuff. Sometimes it's a generator plus a battery, and sometimes it's the whole thing: solar, batteries, generator, all that stuff. So different flavors of like what the benefits are and what you might choose to do that with. Hopefully we can get into that a little bit more.
From the beginning, we've been focused on not only doing solar, but also building microgrids. So our oldest systems are 13 years old, microgrid systems. Every system we've ever installed is still operating very well and doing its job, solar and battery systems. It's not something to be intimidated by, and it's a really great opportunity for resiliency, now for saving money. There are a number of ways to deploy it. There's so much new opportunities, so many new products coming onto the market now, and from some really great companies. But very happy to be here and look forward to hearing what everybody has to say.
You've probably heard of Tesla versus Edison, the current war, right? Many years ago, and Tesla was the one for the AC power, Edison for the DC power, and at that time Tesla won, right? So this is changing now. Just a little bit of a background. Solar is generating direct current power. Batteries, which are now becoming a very important piece of distributed energy storage, they work on direct current. More and more devices around you. The cell phone. You connect it to the wall, but actually you go through power conversion from alternating current into direct current, right? But the device itself actually uses direct current. So with the technological changes in the world, more and more things around us, especially in distributed energy world, are using direct current. So going back to the 0%, I represent a startup. We're 7 years old from Ontario, Canada, which is working on technologies which are integrating distributed energy resources in a microgrid configuration based on a DC direct current network. Unlike some of the participants here, my experience goes back with electrical world only to 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, when somebody would tell me about direct current and AC and DC and microgrids, I'm like, okay, right? But I felt like renewable energy is something which has to change the world, right? And I felt like the traditional structure of electrical systems, which was designed more than 100 years ago and stayed the same, something has to be happening. And that was the moment when I decided to invest my own money in new ideas in that area I had no clue about, right? And here I am, one of the leading developers of direct current technologies, and thank you, Peter, for inviting me.
Well, maybe, since you brought up direct current, I'd be curious to see what the rest of you think about direct current, because most of you work within the AC world, I understand. But why not, since we're trying to go beyond zero for Alexei, what do you guys think about DC? And be nice, because he's right.
Complete crackpot. No. DC, you're so very correct. So much runs on DC, and it's been an evolution of products developed around AC because that was the prevailing technology. There's an amazing opportunity, and some of the things that I've loved over the years is looking at how there's an ability to do DC busing just even within the renewable energy systems, so you're sticking just with DC. There's still a need for AC in certain applications, but DC can certainly be the heart of a lot of systems. So I think it's fantastic, and I don't know a lot about what you're doing, but I want to find out. So that's great.
Thank you very much.
That's great, and I think you're much more than a zero. By the way.
Thank you.
And I actually plan for future projects to be AC-DC hybrids first, and then all DC down the road. The only thing that's really keeping me right now from going all DC, I think, is some of the major appliances. There aren't really many pretty DC appliances. You could probably, I was thinking about this, you could probably take a DC refrigerator and put a panel on it and make it a nice looking assembly, maybe for a small home. But it's funny, I gave a presentation at the Pacific Energy Center in San Francisco a couple of months back, and there was a gentleman from Mitsubishi there, and he represented their mini split heat pump line. So I asked him, do you guys have any DC mini split heat pumps? And he said, no, they all have inverters. So they are DC motors in the heat pumps. And they put an inverter in, which is wasting energy, you're right. I think you can lose 15 to 25% energy when you consider all of the different conversions that are going on. Thanks.
Yeah, I totally second that. So, it really makes sense to have DC network at the edge in the consumer space, because most of the appliances, computers, cell phones, you name it, are all DC operated devices. Some of them are not, but they probably come to. I think the issue is, the loss that happens in the DC is a little bit more than AC. If I put my electrical kind of, engineering cap on. And then the second issue is, standardization. There is, not much standards in terms of sockets and, wire sizes and, all of the other infrastructure really required. So you have to fight this really massive install base of AC infrastructure out there in order to get in there. But I think it makes sense, because it's more efficient use of power, because there are a lot less conversions. And every time you convert it, there's going to be some apparent loss. So.
Thanks. Yeah, so as was mentioned, the batteries are DC, and for us, the battery doesn't really care how you wire it into the system. It is more efficient if you're not converting back and forth a lot. But I think for the retrofits that happen, so all the people who have solar already, they're going to be basically AC coupling a battery, so they already have an inverter. And this is something we hope is happening. So one of the things from Puerto Rico, we hope is a wake-up call for everyone else, is if you have solar, as Peter mentioned, and the grid goes down, you don't have any electricity. It's totally counterintuitive, because you have panels sitting in the sun and they can't do anything. And so for all those folks, and in Hawaii, there's over 20% rooftop solar already. In California, it's about 10-ish, I think. And so getting batteries on those is going to be AC coupling. It's going to be kind of like retrofitting your system. For new construction, I mean, if we count off-grid microgrids, probably 60% of our projects are DC coupled. So it's pretty popular, especially in the off-grid world, and I certainly hope that it's more some of the appliances and infrastructure to be able to do it.
Right.
I just have one more point on that. So last summer I was in India, and there is some good research plus work on the DC microgrids happening there in IIT Madras. So there's a professor there whom I happen to know. And so they actually have lit about 7,000 homes in remote villages just with DC power. So they provide one socket where you can directly connect DC, and then the fan is also DC, and a light that is a LED DC light. So it works, we know that.
Can I respond?
Well, you're talking a lot about DC. Okay.
But when 11 years ago I moved from Russia to the United States, I learned a little bit about the presidential debates, right? And always one of the candidates is supposed to respond, right? But we just have a little bit the opposite, because it's a like very friendly, respectful group of people, right?
That's what Peter
Not
told us
what
to
I usually see here when I watch the debates, right? So, but first of all, I just wanted to say that all your comments are absolutely valid, and this is definitely a set of barriers which the industry I'm in, that 0%, would need to overcome in order to get to that level, right? But that's the reason why right now what we're focused on is not on those benefits related to everything going DC, which is the ultimate goal and where ultimately everybody will go, but something what John mentioned, hybrid situations, right? Whereby we're focusing on those applications where major advantages have to do with situations when even you have AC loads, but you have distributed energy, and using direct current networks, it's easier to interconnect to the utility grid. It's easier to make islanding infrastructure. And then there is one very, very interesting application, EV fast charging. If you think about it, EV fast charging, EV car, is basically a big DC consumer. It's a battery, right? So already today, in that specific area, you're suddenly having a new big direct current world which needs to be taken care of, and it can be taken care of very greatly, with DC coupling. But
First of all, the big opportunity, and I think the most important thing for these community organizations for critical operations, is to be considering resiliency. There's all this discussion about preparedness and being ready for, Marin, get ready, the signs everywhere. This is a really critical opportunity for us right now, before something happens, to put a system in place that can leverage the solar, which is a generator, with a good battery system, with the propane generator, so you basically have an indefinitely sustainable power source that the system could run for years if it needed to. And I know that that's not the likely case that we're planning for, but you never know what that case is going to be. And to not have anything to back the facility up until you run out of your propane tank just isn't responsible in reality, and especially for emergency operations, for firehouses, for water districts. These operations, these are critical to our society, and to not have that power is, it's just not right anymore. We have a way to do it. It's totally affordable. Modern systems don't just provide backup power at this point. You can also leverage these very same systems to be doing demand mitigation or load shifting.
Now remember, they're not a technical audience.
Yeah, well, sorry, we won't get too technical, but there's a way to leverage these batteries to take the energy that you produce or use in the evenings and charge your batteries in the mornings when electricity is cheap, and use some of the battery in the evenings to be able to discharge. So there's actually an economic benefit to batteries in addition to the critical resiliency that they provide. And that's something that's pretty new to the market and pretty exciting. There are a number of companies that are providing platforms. Tesla's all over the news, and they probably are the closest one to a battery in a box kind of thing. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about that, the issue isn't the battery as much as the physical integration, because every facility is unique. Its loads are unique. Its electric panel is different. The generator is different. So you do need to do a little bit of engineering still. And with new construction, with some of the stuff that John's doing, we do a lot of new construction, not as much working with contractors. There's an opportunity to integrate it from the beginning. So, but bottom line is that putting a battery system in a microgrid system into a community center, you're leveraging so much of the investment you've already made. It's an incremental additional investment for a very important resource. So,
Yeah, I wanted Chris to talk next because Chris is a lithium-ion battery, but it's not Tesla, and it's a specific kind of lithium-ion battery. So one concern is about fire hazards in general with batteries, or that's one thing that fire stations are going to be concerned about. So Chris, talk a little bit about your battery technology.
I just want to say we love Blue Planet. So tell Greg I said hi.
Thank you.
No, great technology.
John's got some installed in his building in San Francisco as well. So yeah, our founder, Hank Rogers, who's a little better known for, anybody ever heard of this video game called Tetris? Yeah. So he's the, all right, sometimes that does happen. He's the entrepreneur who brought Tetris to the world. And he had a massive heart attack right after selling some of his game companies and almost, 100% blockage of the Widowmaker artery, and almost died, which was his wake-up call to purpose in life. And so our mission, which is the first mission that he came up with, is to end the use of carbon-based fuel. And in Hawaii, when all these people started putting solar on the grid, the utility basically said stop. And it's too much. And so they made it impossible to keep putting on solar panels unless you agreed not to put electricity back on the grid if you had extra. And so Hank identified storage as like this missing key. And energy storage is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of energy resources. You can do so many things with it. From all the things we've been talking about here. And so Hank set out to really find what's the best battery out there. And he sent engineers to check out these flow batteries, very kind of large and complex buckets of liquid, to check out Tesla, to check out, and at the time it was Sony, who's one of the original manufacturers of lithium-ion batteries. And we really decided that and believe that putting batteries in your home or in your business, safety has to be a really big factor. If you're going to put it in your car, you can run away from your car, that's all right if it catches on fire. But in your house, if it catches on fire, there goes like everything of your home. And so we use a chemistry. So there's about 7 major lithium-ion chemistries that are used to various different degrees. And the one that gets all the attention these days is the one that's being used in electric vehicles. And there's a few varieties. And one of the advantages they have is they're smaller. So for the same size, you get more power. And that's very useful in a car. You want to accelerate, you want to go, you don't want it to take up so much space, you don't want it to be so heavy. But in your home, there's not quite that constraint, and we think it's a good sacrifice to make to have something a little bigger and have it be a lot safer. So our batteries don't contain cobalt. Cobalt is something you'll see in various of these lithium-ion chemistries, and that is kind of the bad actor. And so what happens is as you cycle the batteries, you charge it and discharge it, it gets warmer. And at some point, these batteries, especially these ones with the cobalt in them, they have what we call thermal runaway. They get hotter and hotter and hotter, and at some point they can't stop getting hot, and they catch themselves on fire and burn themselves out. And we've been doing a lot more education with our dealers now to go through the warranties of the other manufacturers of batteries, because sometimes it will void your fire insurance if you have some of these batteries. There are toxic and noxious gases released from these batteries if they do catch on fire. Just so far this year in Korea, there's been 6 major battery fires, lithium-ion battery fires. These are like megawatt-hour scale batteries, and they've all been, those were LG and Samsung cells. And this is after they cycle for a while, and then they start to get compromised. And so we use what's called lithium iron phosphate, or lithium ferrous phosphate. So it's lithium, iron, and phosphate, right? Phosphate's the stuff your garden needs to grow, iron, rust, right? Common elements in the, so no toxics, no conflict minerals, and it's basically as environmentally friendly as you can get in the lithium-ion world, and it doesn't have this risk of thermal runaway. So that's kind of, when you get into selecting batteries, it gets really geeky really quick. which is why we find that we do a lot of education, even with our installers and dealers who are, dealing with this stuff all the time, to help them to sort through all these differences. Because you've got technology differences, safety differences, warranty differences, and then you still need to do the things of just how big do I need a system to be, right? So and so that's picking your sort of like power needs and your energy needs. So in John's building, for example, we have we back up the elevator.
You run it.
We run the elevator, and driven by the need to have backup for it. And so that takes, the elevator is a big load, right? It is a 3-phase, and it is it's a really beefy elevator, right? And so that took 2 of our systems, but that's because our systems can crank out a lot of power each one. And if it were even possible, which it's not due to some electrical configuration needs, but just to give you the example, just the same amount of power from the Powerwall would have taken 4 to be able to meet that power level. So you need to match like the technology to the use case, and then also factor in these other factors, like how important is safety for you? How important is that longevity? So that's my little spiel on chemistry and safety.
If I have solar on my roof and I have a battery that I can store power in, is that what I am looking to do if I want to be able to survive in a power outage?
In the most basic sense, I guess you could say yes, but
Repeat the question.
Oh, yeah.
the question is, we have a lot of homes here in Stinson. We've chronicled how many of them have solar, but it's true that if the grid goes down, even, this community center, the community center and the water district and the fire station have backup generators, so they would still have power as long as there was fuel. So, but if, let's say, there was an earthquake, or let's say PG&E were in a high fire danger and PG&E shuts off the power for a week, we could run out of that fuel in even the community centers. But in terms of homes, it is basically a battery, but then it's also about how, do you want power for a full day, 2 days? So that's all about sizing the battery, like how much resiliency do you want? A lot of the batteries installed might last 4 hours. I mean, most power outages aren't that long, so it's also kind of you deciding how much resiliency do you want. I mean, that's at a very high level. Let's let some Bipple hasn't spoken about. Let's let.
So you asked about some practical approaches. So there are 2, right? So one is what John has done is you could basically create your own grid for your own house, right? So you got solar, you got an inverter that converts that solar and connects to the grid, and you put a battery system, and then you have to have some kind of smartness, smart controller we call it, that basically senses whether I'm connected or I'm not connected to PG&E. If you're not connected, it will basically cut you off and then it will run internally. So that's one approach. It's possible today. John has already done it in the San Francisco apartment. It's expensive a little bit to do it today, but the prices will come down. Battery prices are coming down. We have makers of the batteries who are doing that. The second approach is in a community, from a community perspective, you want to, at least for every city or every neighborhood, you want to have a place where you can shelter people, right? In case of a disaster or in case of a long-term outage, right? We are dealing with some cities, there is only one feeder. I mean, talk about Portola Valley, right?
Explain what a feeder is.
Yeah, there's one line coming from the PG&E, from mains, from the substation, only one line, and something, fire or something knocks that out, the whole community, 700 homes are basically out of the power. And what do you do in that kind of situation? So the projects that we are involved in is, you take a community center like this, or a firehouse just adjacent to it, and then as Peter mentioned, we'll actually create local power here. Clean power, using solar panels, battery systems, and all of that. So that people can assemble, there will be basic amenities available, food, water, shelter, all of that is available until the main line is restored. So I think there are 2 approaches. You can do a per house basis, and every community needs to be thinking of doing it at a community level as well. Frank and I are involved in multiple projects in multiple cities where they are thinking of actually creating these kind of emergency shelters everywhere in every city. It's possible today, and you can do it with completely clean power without any problem.
But the energy source during that disaster, when the line is cut,
Yeah.
so you got the 750 homes without power. The residents are then going to have to come to the community center, and maybe they can charge their phone or do small electronics like that. But there's no transference of the energy back to the houses. The energy is used here, so food storage, things like that would all have to happen in the community center.
Yeah. So the question is, sorry.
Oh, I was going to answer that, but
Oh, no, I was going to repeat the question. Yeah, the question is that, you have power in the community, but how do you take that power to the homes around it? So, yeah, there is.
So I'd like to jump in here for a moment. So there are, for your individual example, you were asking what would you need, and the answer is a small battery system will be able to provide power for a few things in your home, coupled with attached with your solar, so if the grid goes away, if there's a blackout for a short term or long term, you're going to have the ability to charge your small battery to be able to run things like a refrigerator, some lights, communications, charging small devices. So even a very small battery is going to be enough for you to get a long way, the very basic functions. Okay, and we've done a couple hundred of these systems, and it's always about, and Peter was talking about this, balancing how much solar you have with how much batteries that you have is really a function of how much are you trying to back up.
Right.
Do you just want your refrigerator and a couple of light bulbs, or do you want the fountains in the pool running? You know, so you can, and we've done every version of that.
But following up, you mentioned 4 hours. So assume that the situation that he asked, where you have your own home, you have your solar, and then you have a battery. Maybe I just don't understand the concept, but I thought the solar keeps coming every day
Yes.
and refilling the battery. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Therefore, you have more than 4 hours, assuming we have several days of sun during a catastrophe after an earthquake.
That's right, and part of it, of course, is designing the system to accommodate, because if the power is going to go out when it's stormy and it's dark and it's winter, that's when our power goes out. So counting on the solar entirely isn't enough. We've never designed a system with a 4-hour runtime. That's more like commercial applications where they're trying to offset load shifting and demand mitigation. Sorry, yeah. So the point is, when we design a system, or when any of us will design a system, we're going to be aiming at numbers of days. Right. And we always do the calculation based on no solar. So here's your very worst case scenario, but you're always going to get a little something from your solar system. And so I'm going to give this back to Peter now, but it's totally viable. Oh, here you go, John.
So in our building, for instance, we wanted to have everything backed up. We wanted to have everything backed up in our building. So we have 3 batteries per unit, and that's a total of 40.5 kilowatt hours. Each unit is using about 20 kilowatt hours a day. So that's 2 full days of battery backup that's constantly being repowered every day by the sun. So since we commissioned the building, we haven't drawn any power at all from the grid. It's essentially, it's grid tied, but we're not using grid power at this point. So it just depends on what you want to have operating when the power goes out.
But one thing I wanted to say is, one thing we talked about the options. The other option, a lot back east, the community microgrids are trying to say, well, what about, if there is no gas station in Stinson Beach, there was a long time ago, but what if you had actually private businesses that were also considered critical, like a food store, for example, or a gas station or other things? Why can't we create a microgrid with all of those a mixture of stuff? And that's the most difficult microgrid, just because of the way regulations exist. There's different kinds of customers, and you would almost have to have the utility involved. And there are utilities now getting involved, but a lot of them will work with a private company to supply the battery, to supply the solar, and so then you're seeing these kind of systems where are mixed sort of entities. So let's ask another question.
Cost. two full-size refrigerators and one freezer, and heat, let's say three electric heaters, not burning propane, electric heaters, cost.
What are you asking, the cost of what, a microgrid for that? That's
They pull out my
hard.
calculator.
Yeah.
No, this is where the math comes in.
Yeah, right.
You look at each of the loads,
Right.
the refrigerators,
Don't use the
The
word.
question-
the freezers.
The question was,
Repeat the question.
Typically, that kind of system, you have a couple of refrigerators, some heating system, some lights. We have seen that in a community center kind of setting. It's about, 30, 35, 40, double the size that John just said, kWh usage. kWh is a unit. You get charged by a unit in the bill. Kilowatt hour. So, 40, so for a 2-day backup system, you need about 40 times 2, maybe 60, 70, 80 kWh battery. And at today's prices, maybe $500 installed. I mean, on the high side, it could be even less. Probably Chris may know better. It's about, $30,000-$40,000. Am I? $30,000-$40,000.
that's
just the
that's a
battery.
big system,
That's battery.
but that's a big system.
That's a pretty big system.
Yeah.
Yeah, but 2 or 3 refrigerators, heating systems, lights,
Yeah,
and running it 24/7.
but for a home or a commercial facility?
I thought commercial facility, right?
Big house.
Big house.
That's a big.
Sure.
So,
So one thing I think is kind of important to think about here is, if we're talking about, you can back up the whole place, whether it's a house or a business, or just some of it, like Peter was mentioning, sort of carve off some important pieces. Once you do that though, so with the equipment you have there, you are your own utility, right? So we actually sort of frame it as you can use the grid as backup, which is kind of what John does. And so he's all self-sufficient. And at that point, everything you used to pay the utility, you're now, you can consider that what you're saving because of the equipment you have. And, there is some math that comes in here. I know our founder, he went completely off grid. So he was grid tied. The utility wanted to charge him to interconnect to the grid because of he was putting 20 kilowatts of solar on the house. And it's a pretty big system, but for residential. And so he just decided to cut the cord and be totally independent. And when you do that, you have a totally different experience of your energy system. So we have a very simple monitoring app, and we explain it to people kind of like, it's like your car dashboard, right? You have your speedometer, which tells you how fast you're going, and you have your fuel tank. And with those two things, you can kind of navigate and figure out more or less how far you're going to go. So the speedometer is the amount of power you need. So that's those heaters, those freezers, those are your big loads. You got to figure out what those big loads are. So, oops, I said loads, sorry.
Yeah, you did.
And
Your
then-
big energy
and then
users.
How fast, how long you can run them is based on how much fuel's in your tank. So that's kind of how big you make that battery bank. That's that tank of energy that you can store. That's kind of trying to get, because it's a totally shifting experience. We don't really pay attention to all this stuff, right? We flip on a light switch, the light comes on, we pay the power bill at the end of the month. We don't have to pay attention to all these details, but when you're thinking, if we're thinking about this kind of a crisis situation, whether it's an earthquake or a fire, and there's not those services we're used to depending on, it's good to practice, right? Practice being ready for emergencies.
Maybe I should have framed the question on the basis of the electrical bill. Say the electrical bill is $500 a month. What would I need to invest in a microgrid to offset that?
$500 a month, that's a pretty big bill. Yeah. So I would imagine, the question was, the bill is $500 a month. So what size of a system would you need to offset that, and how much would it cost, right?
Right.
So to put that in the context of our building, if I can just kind of make it relative to that, we anticipated that their bills would be about $200 a month. And each system was, the battery system and inverter system was total $18,000. So that was for 200, however, we're generating twice as much power as we need. Do you already have solar? Or do you need to add that into the cost as well?
Do I have solar?
Yeah, do you have solar now? Okay, so you'd want to do, you're talking solar storage. and all of the equipment to make it happen, right? You're probably looking, yeah, around 40,000, I would say minimum, probably total. Only, yeah.
Well, let's use the example. Unfortunately, is Toby still here? No, he isn't. So I'm wondering, so here we have solar and a generator already.
Yeah.
So really, the cost of a microgrid would just be the battery
yes,
and the
right.
integration.
Right.
I mean,
But he was
the
talking
load
about-
is of this at 10 kilowatts, let's say, or less.
Right. This building would be a lot easier. You already
Yeah,
have the
really
solar. He was talking about he doesn't have
I know,
any
but I'm
solar.
saying, let's think, what would the cost of adding the battery and creating a microgrid here be? Just very top of the envelope.
If I may, so this is a great question you have. How much?
Yeah.
And the answer is relative to how much energy you use. How big is your electric bill? How many things do you want to back up? How long do you want them to run for? So it's not just a canned answer. We can all come up with estimates sitting here. The important thing is that if it's something you're interested in doing, talk to a professional that knows how to do this, and we can do some quick back of the envelope math and say this is approximately what you're looking at, and then go look at the facility and actually determine more exactly what you would want, what it would cost you. Whether it's a community center that just needs batteries, or somebody that wants the entire gamut, or something very minimal. There's a whole range of opportunities and options.
Sure.
This is a really critical opportunity for us right now, before something happens, to put a system in place that can leverage the solar, which is a generator, with a good battery system, with the propane generator. So you basically have an indefinitely sustainable power source that the system could run for years if it needed to. And I know that that's not the likely case that we're planning for, but you never know what that case is going to be. And to not have anything to back the facility up until you run out of your propane tank just isn't responsible in reality, and especially for emergency operations, for firehouses, for water districts. These operations, these are critical to our society, and to not have that power is, it's just not right anymore. We have a way to do it. It's totally affordable. Modern systems don't just provide backup power at this point. You can also leverage these very same systems to be doing demand mitigation or load shifting.
Now remember, they're not a technical audience.
Yeah, well, sorry. We won't get too technical, but there's a way to leverage these batteries to take the energy that you produce or use in the evenings and charge your batteries in the mornings when electricity is cheap, and use some of the battery in the evenings to be able to discharge. So there's actually an economic benefit to batteries in addition to the critical resiliency that they provide.
Like, what I think people are kind of looking to Peter, and you guys are really lucky to have this like global leader and thought leader on this whole subject right here in town, to kind of have the answer to what to do. And I think really my hope is that we've informed and inspired you about some of the possibilities so that you all can answer the question as to what do we want. And as you start to get down that, any of us can work with you on kind of helping that. But time is of the essence. The federal tax credit, the ITC, is scheduled to start decreasing over time. So it's at its highest level right now. And then there's also another bill which we just passed, SB 700 in California, which extends the SGIP program, which is the Self-Generation Incentive Program, and that provides I think it's a rebate.
So rebate for batteries.
If you install batteries with your, and then also the IRS just ruled that if you retrofit solar with batteries, you can get the ITC on just that.
ITC is an income tax credit, right?
ITC is a tax credit, yes, a federal tax credit. So anyway, the timing's good now that the savings are kind of in our
I want
favor.
to say one quick thing. And as far as the timing being important, I'm sure you all know about the new IPCC report that came out that says we really need to decarbonize our society as soon as possible. And that's, everything that we're talking about, it's dollars and cents, and it actually pencils out really well now. That's what we're all trying to kind of get across. But the societal imperative is that we need to decarbonize. And what we're talking about doing is electrifying our communities locally, providing local jobs, and decarbonizing the environment at the same time.
I want to add in a little thing. I'm a big fan of Nova, and I saw this great documentary the other day. Sometimes I look at this issue, this global issue of reducing carbon emissions and just seeing how the vast majority of the 7 billion people on the planet and growing, they're interested in the moment. They're interested in right now, and greed unfortunately drives so much of the big decisions, and it seems impossible sometimes, but it's doable. There was an issue that came up, I'm sure you all remember the ozone hole, and we absolutely cut CFCs, period, done, they're gone, okay? And it's been making a positive difference. So it seems very difficult, but we all need to do our part, and everybody here, this is the smartest, most affluent part of the entire planet, and if we're not going to do it, and we're not going to start, who is? So just wanted to point that out, it is possible.
Yes, good, and on a positive note, I also want to let you know that all of the contact information of everybody on this panel, there were some handouts here. Looks like there's still a few left, so hopefully it looks like people grab those. And I guess with that, why don't we just wind down the public presentation, but we'll linger, and if you want to talk to a specific person here, get their business card or whatever, go for it. There's still, I think, some food back there. We're welcome.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Peter.